What if one man's fury becomes the hinge upon which an entire kingdom swings? What if the moment that should have ended everything, instead, becomes the moment everything truly begins? The great sept of Baelor sits heavy in the morning air, its 7 crystals catching the light in the way they always do, indifferent to the suffering gathered beneath them. The crowd presses in from every direction, common folk and merchants and frightened servants, all of them drawn here the way people are always drawn to the spectacle of a great man's destruction. Ned Stark kneels at the center of it, his gray hair lank against his neck, his wrists bound in chains that the Lannister guards had fastened with particular satisfaction. He does not beg. He has never begged. And even now, with the words of confession still bitter in his mouth from the day before, with the knowledge that he has compromised every principle he has ever held in exchange for a promise that is already dissolving, Ned Stark kneels with the posture of a man who has decided that dignity is the last thing no one can take from him. Joffrey speaks. The boy's voice carries the particular cruelty of someone who has only ever experienced power as entertainment, high and bright, and entirely pleased with itself. The word he uses is execution. He says it the way another boy might say, a sweet he wants for supper. The crowd shifts uneasily, because even those who despise the Starks understand, at some animal level, that something is being broken here that cannot be unbroken. An oath is being shattered. A promise made to a man on his knees is being discarded with a child's carelessness. Sansa Stark makes a sound from somewhere in the crowd, barely audible, but it carries. And then the doors of the sept open. Robert Baratheon moves the way large forces of nature move, not quickly, but with a mass that makes speed irrelevant. He is drunk. That much is visible from a distance, visible in the looseness of his step and the flush riding high on his broad face. He is also furious, and the fury burns clean and cold beneath the wine, the way deep fires sometimes run under the surface of the earth. He has heard what is happening. He has heard, and he has come, and everyone in the sept understands immediately that the calculation has changed. Cersei stands very still. She is a woman who has spent 20 years preparing for every scenario, mapping every contingency, and she is now watching one of those scenarios materialize that she had assigned the smallest possible probability, the scenario in which her husband still cares enough to act. She watches him cross the floor of the sept, and her face does not move, but behind her eyes the pieces are already shifting, already rearranging. Robert invokes the ancient rite. He knows the words. Of course he knows the words. This is a man who was fostered at Storm's End under Jon Arryn, tutored in the laws and traditions of Westeros, before he ever became the symbol that swallowed the man. The ancient rite of trial by combat exists precisely for moments like this one, when the power of kings becomes indistinguishable from the appetites of children. He invokes it with the flat certainty of someone reciting a law they know cannot be argued away, and he announces that he will stand as Ned Stark's champion himself. The protests come immediately. Cersei's voice is controlled, almost gentle, the voice she uses when she wants to appear reasonable, while ensuring her preferred outcome. She speaks of Robert's health, his age, the years of comfortable living. She gestures, barely perceptibly, towards Sir Meryn Trant, who steps forward in his white cloak with the blank, ready expression of a man who has spent his career being weaponized. Robert looks at Trant the way a man looks at something small and unfortunate standing between him and the door. A gold cloak near the edge of the floor carries a war hammer on his belt, ceremonial in its placement but functional in its construction, the kind of weapon kept nearby in case the crowd needed reminding of authority. Robert takes it. He does not ask. He simply reaches out and takes it, and the gold cloak does not resist, because there are things a man's body understands before his mind catches up, and the man's body understands that this is not a moment for resistance. The crowd remembers. That is the thing Cersei has miscalculated. She has looked at the man and seen the fat and the flush and the years of excess, and she has not looked far enough back to the memory that lives in the bones of everyone old enough to hold it. These people remember the trident. They remember what Robert Baratheon did to Rhaegar Targaryen in the waters of that river, the hammer rising and falling, the rubies scattering across the current. They remember what kind of creature Robert was before the throne made him comfortable and the throne made him miserable. The memory lives in the sept, the way a scent lives in an old room. Trant moves well. He is a trained knight, precise and disciplined, and he opens a cut across Robert's forearm in the first exchange, clean and deep. Robert does not stop. He does not even seem to register it as relevant information. He swings once. The sound the hammer makes against Sir Meryn Trant's chest is not the sound of a fight continuing. It is the sound of a fight ending. Trant does not fall so much as cease. The structure that was holding him upright simply stops performing that function, and he goes down among the stones of the sept floor and does not move again. The silence that follows has weight and texture. It presses against the walls. It fills the vaulted space above the crowd, displacing the incense and the morning light, replacing them with something that has no name, but that everyone present can feel against the back of their teeth. Robert stands over the body, breathing hard, his forearm bleeding freely onto the stones. He turns. He looks directly at Cersei, and his face holds something she has not seen in a very long time. The face of a man who has burned through every layer of reluctance and arrived at the place underneath, the place where all the grievances live, the real ones, the ones he has been feeding wine and feasts and hunting trips for years in an attempt to keep them quiet. He raises the hammer, not to strike, simply to point. The gesture is unhurried and absolute. The chains fall from Ned Stark's wrists, and Robert Baratheon, King of the Seven Kingdoms, says 4 words that land in the silence of the sept, like stones dropped into still water, each one sending rings outward that will take years to stop moving. Now, we find out. The blood drips from Robert's forearm onto the sept floor in a slow, metronomic pattern, each drop striking stone with the quiet certainty of a clock counting down to something irreversible. No one moves, no one speaks. The gold cloaks who flanked Cersei only moments ago have gone still in the way that men go still when they realize the ground beneath them has shifted and they do not yet know whether it will hold. Ned Stark stands where he has been freed, rubbing the raw skin of his wrists, watching the king he has known since boyhood, and measuring the expression on that broad, weathered face with the careful attention of a man who understands what it costs Robert Baratheon to be quiet. Because Robert is quiet now. That is the thing that cuts through every person in the sept more cleanly than shouting would. The silence coming off him is not the silence of a man who has run out of words. It is the silence of a man who has decided that words are no longer the instrument he intends to use, and that what comes next will not require them. Cersei knows this silence. She was married to it for 17 years, and in all that time she never once saw it worn on his face for her. She saw it in his eyes when he spoke of Lyanna. She sees it now, and it is directed at her like a drawn blade, and the cold intelligence moving behind it is something she has always known lived in him, beneath the whine and the bluster, something she counted on, keeping buried. Ned speaks first. He speaks because someone has to, and because the truth has been sitting in his chest like a stone he has been carrying since the moment he read Jon Arryn's last letter, since the moment he stood in the library and turned the pages and understood what had been done in the shadows of the capital, while the realm went on pretending the light was clean. If you're enjoying this alternate history of Westeros so far, please consider subscribing, because I upload new stories every single day. Now let's continue with the story. He speaks quietly, directly, with none of the political cushioning that King's Landing teaches a man to layer around difficult facts. He tells Robert about Jon Arryn. He tells him what Jon discovered, and what that discovery cost him, who administered the final mercy, and at whose instruction, the name of the poison, and the name of the hand that held the cup. He tells him about the children. He speaks their names gently, not cruelly, because they are not to blame for what they were born into, but he does not soften the shape of what they represent or who their father is. Robert listens to all of it without interruption. He does not weep. He does not strike anything or anyone. His jaw tightens once, a single muscular contraction that passes across his face like a ripple across deep water, and then his expression settles back into that terrible, controlled stillness. The hammer hangs at his side. The blood drips on. When Ned finishes, the king says nothing for a long moment. Then he turns to the nearest gold cloak commander and issues 3 instructions in a voice so flat and so measured that the commander repeats them back immediately, as if wanting to be certain he has heard correctly. The Red Keep's gates are to be sealed. No ravens are to fly without the king's direct authorization. The small council is to convene in 1 hour, and the Lannisters, every one of them, by name, are to be excluded from that chamber and escorted to their apartments under guard. The commander hesitates for only a heartbeat, long enough for Robert to turn his eyes toward him, and then the hesitation ends, and boots are moving on stone, and the sept is filling with the purposeful noise of orders being carried out. Cersei watches her world begin to close around her like a fist, and she does not let it show on her face. She has been preparing for this contingency for years in the abstract, the way one prepares for the possibility of flood, by knowing which exits exist, without truly believing the water will come. The water has come. She calculates distances. She calculates loyalty, which figures in King's Landing are purchased, and which are merely rented, which might be persuaded to look the other way for long enough to get a message out, to get children out, to begin the sequence of events her brother would have known how to arrange. But Jaime is gone from the city, and her father is days away in the Westerlands, and the gates are already closing. Maester Pycelle understands before most. He understands because he knows his own guilt with the clarity of a man who has long since stopped pretending it was anything other than what it was, and he moves through corridors he has navigated for decades with arthritic haste, his robes whispering against the stone, his old hands trembling as he climbs toward the rookery. There is a raven prepared. There has always been a raven prepared. He reaches for it in the gray morning light streaming through the narrow window, his fingers closing around the scroll case with the practiced efficiency of a man who has sent such messages before and believed himself invisible in the sending. He is not invisible. He has never been invisible to everyone. The door opens behind him, not the gold cloaks. They arrive a moment later. First comes only a soft footstep and the faint scent of something perfumed, and Pycelle turns to find Varys standing in the entrance to the rookery, hands folded within his sleeves, his round face arranged in an expression of serene and absolute patience, his eyes holding the quiet satisfaction of a man watching the last piece settle into the place he always knew it would occupy. The scroll case is still in Pycelle's hand. The raven turns on its perch, unsentenced, unflown, and the gold cloaks fill the doorway behind Varys like a tide coming in. The stables of the Red Keep smell of hay and horse sweat and the particular kind of urgency that accompanies decisions made in darkness before dawn has fully committed itself to the sky. Cersei has planned this carefully, or as carefully as a woman can plan, when the ground beneath her has been shifting for days, and the man she counted on to keep it stable is locked in a tower with his wounds and his changed allegiances. The horses are ready, 3 of them, saddled by servants who asked no questions because they understood instinctively that questions would not serve them this morning. Joffrey stands beside the largest mount with the coiled energy of a boy who believes himself a man, his hand already resting on the hilt of the sword he has no business wearing. Myrcella is pale and silent. Tommen does not entirely understand what is happening, which is perhaps the only mercy the morning offers any of them. Cersei knows the Kingswood. She has hunted there a dozen times at Robert's side, enduring his laughter and his careless cruelty and the particular way he looked at her, which was to say, the particular way he did not look at her. She knows its paths. She knows which roads open eventually into Lannister-held country and which ones do not. This is the calculation she has been running since before she heard the result of the combat, not because she anticipated losing, but because Cersei Lannister has always run the losing calculation alongside the winning one, the way a chess player studies the board from both sides of the table. She does not believe in single outcomes. She believes in contingencies. The contingency she has not accounted for is Ned Stark standing in the stable doorway with a dozen men at his back. He does not speak immediately. He does not need to. He simply stands there in the gray morning light, his gray eyes moving across the scene with the methodical patience of a man cataloging the positions of every piece on the board. The horses, the children, the servants pressing themselves against the walls, Joffrey's hand on his hilt. There is a quality to Ned Stark's silences that his enemies consistently underestimate. They mistake it for slowness. It is not slowness, it is precision. Cersei holds his gaze. She is a woman who has held the gazes of kings and high lords and men who believed their stares carried the weight of authority, and she has not yet learned to look away from any of them. She does not look away now. What passes between them in that moment is not a conversation. It is an acknowledgement. She knows he has been watching. He knows she has been calculating. Neither of them pretends otherwise, because pretense is a currency that has run out. Joffrey moves first. He always moves first, which is among his many failures as a strategist. The stable boy is simply in the wrong place, reaching for a bridle, turning at the sound of raised voices, failing to retreat quickly enough. And then Joffrey's blade is out, and the boy's cheek is open and bleeding before anyone has drawn a full breath. It is the act of someone who has confused violence with power. which is a confusion Joffrey has been nurtured into by years of watching adults perform both and mistake one for the other. The Hound moves with a quietness that his size makes seem impossible. He has been standing at the edge of the group in the way that Sandor Clegane habitually occupies the edges of things, present, watchful, performing loyalty, while privately conducting his own accounting of where loyalty is owed and to whom. That accounting has reached its conclusion sometime in the last 24 hours, and the conclusion has a name, and the name is not Joffrey. He takes the blade from the boy's hand the way one removes something dangerous from a child, efficiently, without theater, with the calm authority of someone who has decided. Joffrey stares at him. The Hound does not stare back. He turns instead toward Ned Stark, and the inclination of his head is small but unmistakable, and Ned receives it with the same quiet precision with which he has received everything else this morning. Cersei watches this exchange and understands immediately what it means. She has always understood Clegane better than Joffrey has, because she has never made the mistake of believing that brutality and loyalty are the same thing. The Hound has served because service suited him. It no longer suits him. She files this information away in the careful archive she keeps of betrayals and revised allegiances, because it will matter later. Everything matters later. When you are Cersei Lannister, and later is the only territory that remains to you. They separate the children from her in the inner courtyard. She watches Myrcella taken away by a septa she does not recognize, which means the woman is loyal to the crown rather than to gold, which means Cersei cannot buy her. She watches Tommen reach back toward her once, his small hand opening and closing on air, before the women close around him. She watches Joffrey shrugged between two Stark guardsmen with a fury that will not serve him and which she cannot presently contain. And then she calculates. Her chambers are comfortable. They have always been comfortable. Robert has never believed in punishing Cersei through comfort, which has always been his error, because comfort is where Cersei does her best thinking. She sits at her window as the bolt slides home on the outside of her door, and she begins the long, patient inventory of what remains to her. The city is still there beyond the walls, the city with its 1,000 moving parts, and its shifting allegiances, and its hunger, and its fear. Littlefinger has not yet been found, and somewhere in the maze of debt and obligation and whispered promise that underpins the throne, there are threads she has not yet pulled. She reaches for the first of them. The letter arrives at Casterly Rock on the 4th day, not by Royal Raven, which Robert has already thought to intercept. He is not the king he was 10 years ago, not entirely, and the men around him now include Ned Stark, who thinks in straight lines but thinks them quickly. No. The letter arrives folded inside a merchant's invoice, buried between columns of figures detailing the price of Myrish lace and the weight of a cargo of Pentoshi glass, and it is written in a hand that looks like an accounting clerk's until Tywin Lannister holds it to the light and reads what is actually there. He reads it once, he sets it down on the table of his solar, smooths it flat with one broad hand, and reads it again. Then he burns it. The fire takes it completely, as fire takes everything given to it without reluctance or reservation. Tywin does not summon his maester immediately. He does not call for his bannermen, or reach for pen and parchment, or do any of the things a lesser man might do in the first cold shock of news like this. He stands at the window of his solar and looks out over the Westerlands spreading below him, and he thinks, this is what Tywin Lannister does better than any other man alive. He thinks the way other men breathe. without effort, without interruption, with the steady mechanical reliability of something that will not stop until the body it belongs to does. Cersei is held. The children are held. Ned Stark stands restored where Tywin had arranged for him to fall, and Robert Baratheon, whom Tywin has understood for 20 years as a man of appetites rather than intentions, has apparently found an intention. This is the variable. Tywin had not adequately waited. He acknowledges this to himself without sentiment. A strategist who cannot identify his own miscalculations cannot correct them, and Tywin Lannister has not survived this long by lying to himself about the quality of his own work. The message to Jaime goes out within the hour. It is not a royal message. It travels by a route Tywin established years ago for purposes exactly like this one, through a chain of riders whose loyalties are bound not to crowns or castles, but to Lannister gold, which has always been the more reliable currency. The message is brief. Jaime will understand what brevity means coming from his father at a moment like this. He will understand what is not written as clearly as what is. Jaime receives it outside the walls of Riverrun on a gray morning, with rain threatening from the west. The kind of morning that makes siege work feel like punishment, and makes men think about dry halls and hot food, and reasons to be somewhere else. He reads the message on horseback, which is where Jaime receives most things, in motion, already committed to a direction, because stillness has never suited him. He reads it, and something happens behind his eyes that the men around him will describe differently, depending on who they are and how well they know him. The younger soldiers will say he looked angry. His senior captains, the ones who have served him long enough to know the difference, will say he looked cold. Not angry. Cold is different. Cold is a thing that has made a decision. Cersei is a prisoner of the crown. The children are wards of the crown, which is a phrase that means exactly what it sounds like, and nothing softer. He does not finish the thought about what this means for his son, for Joffrey, for what Joffrey is, and what that secret cost his mother to maintain. He does not finish it. He does not need to. He turns to his second in command, a steady Lannister man named Adam Marbrand, who has followed Jaime through enough campaigns to ask questions only when they are useful. "We're lifting the siege," Jaime says. Marbrand looks at the walls of Riverrun, at the encampment that represents weeks of work and positioning, at the river approaches they have spent significant effort controlling. He says nothing that could be mistaken for an objection. "Break camp by nightfall," Jaime says. "We march south." 8,000 men. The siege abandoned. The ground conceded. Lord Hoster Tully left standing on his battlements in the morning light, with an expression that his maester will later describe as a man discovering the snake he spent a week trying not to step on, has simply decided to go elsewhere. Relief complicated by the certainty that this is not over. Nothing is over. It has simply moved. Back at Casterly Rock, Tywin's ravens go out in a different direction. Not south toward King's Landing. Not yet. That would be a declaration, and Tywin does not make declarations before he knows the ground. These ravens go west and north and east, into the Westerlands, into the reaches where Lannister gold has built 20 years of obligation and expectation and carefully tended dependency. Lords who owe their walls to Lannister loans. Knights whose second sons wear Lannister livery. Men who have been warm near the fire long enough to fear the cold. But the responses that come back are cautious, measured, full of the language men use when they want to be understood as loyal, without committing to what loyalty will cost them. Robert is alive. Stark walks free. The royal children's status is unresolved, but the investigation exists, which means legitimacy itself is contested ground, and no great lord becomes a rebel on contested ground if he has any ground of his own to protect. They are waiting, all of them, waiting to see which way the wind sets before they name it. Tywin reads each response in turn. He is not surprised. He would not respect them if they were less careful. But careful men can be moved, given the right lever, and Tywin has spent a lifetime understanding where levers sit. He calls for his maester before the last letter is read, and when the old man arrives, ink-stained and slightly breathless from the stairs, Tywin is already composing something in his head that will not be written down at all. Not yet. Not until he knows which of his probes has found something solid enough to press against. "Sit," he tells the maester. "I have a letter for Lord Paramount Mace Tyrell." The maester sits. He dips his quill. He waits for what Tywin will say next, and in that waiting, so does everything else. The candles have burned low in the Tower of the Hand. There are 4 of them set around the room in iron holders, and they have been burning since before the sun went down. And now the room exists in that particular quality of light that belongs only to the deepest hours. Amber and unsteady, casting long shadows that move when nothing else does. Robert Baratheon sits with his elbows on his knees and his great head bowed forward. And he is not drunk. This is the thing that strikes Ned Stark most forcefully. More than the hour, more than the silence outside, more than the weight of what he is about to say. Robert is not drunk. He has been sitting in this chair for the better part of an hour, with a cup he has barely touched, and his eyes are clear, and his hands are still, and he is waiting. Ned tells him everything. He does not rush it. He does not soften it more than truth allows. He begins at the beginning, at Harrenhal, at the tourney, at the way Robert himself had told Lyanna she would be his queen, as though the matter were already settled, and she need only accept what had been decided on her behalf. He does not say this as accusation. He says it because it is where the thread begins, and the thread must be followed to where it ends. He speaks of the months that followed. He speaks of Rhaegar Targaryen, and what little he knows, and what little, perhaps, any man truly knows. He speaks of the Tower of Joy, and the men who died there, good men, Ned's men, dead on the sand outside a place that should not have mattered, and mattered more than any castle in the 7 kingdoms. He speaks of what he found at the top of the stairs. He speaks of Lyanna's voice, faint and far away already, and what she made him swear. Robert is very still. He does not speak when Ned pauses. He does not fill the silences with questions or denials, or the hot and sudden anger that has always been his first instrument. He sits in his chair with his hands loosely clasped between his knees, and he listens, and his face does something that is not quite grief and not quite understanding. It is the face of a man who has been given back something he thought he understood and finds that he has never understood it at all. The story he has carried for 15 years, Lyanna stolen, Lyanna taken, Lyanna the innocent center of another man's crime, is being set down and replaced, gently, irreversibly, with something that has no villain at its heart, and therefore no clean place for his grief to rest. He does not accept it, not fully. Perhaps he never will. But when Ned finishes speaking, and the silence settles again between them, like a third presence in the room, Robert says nothing for a long time, and then he says, very quietly, that the boy is Ned's son. His, Ned's. That is what he is, and that is what he will be called, and that is the end of it. He does not say it as though he is being generous. He says it as though he is making something official in the only court that matters to him, which is the court of his own conscience, such as it is. He does not finish what might have come after. He does not need to. Ned watches the king and says nothing. There is nothing to say that would improve the moment or survive it intact, and so he lets it stand. By the time the city beyond the window begins its first gray pre-dawn murmuring, the work of the night has taken on its more formal shape. A decree is drawn, not quickly, not carelessly, but with the kind of deliberate weight that Robert applies to almost nothing and applies now with both hands. Ned Stark is restored as Hand of the King. The document is witnessed by 3 lords summoned quietly through back corridors before the sun has risen. Lord Renly Baratheon, who comes quickly and signs without comment, his expression unreadable in that particular way it has always been. Lord Barristan Selmy, who reads every word and signs with the gravity of a man who has been waiting for something solid to stand on. And Lord Mathis Rowan, visiting the capital on separate business and now folded into history, whether he wished it or not. 3 signatures, a seal pressed in green wax, a document that will not easily be undone. The second matter is harder, and Robert does not linger over it. Joffrey's place in the succession is formally suspended pending the investigation into the Queen's conduct and the question of the prince's legitimacy. The language is careful. It does not accuse. It merely creates a space where the question lives, and in that space, Robert places the name of Stannis Baratheon, written in his own hand, sealed with the royal signet, and sent by Raven from the rookery before the city has fully woken. Stannis, who has been waiting on Dragonstone with his patience and his righteousness and his long memory for slights, will receive a letter that tells him he is heir to the Iron Throne. What Stannis does with that letter is its own question entirely, and the Raven is already gone, carrying it east across the water before Robert has returned to the Tower of the Hand, where Ned Stark stands reading the decree a second time, looking not relieved, but deeply, carefully afraid, the way a man looks when the weight he has been given is real. The Riverlands burn before Jaime Lannister gives the order. That is the truth of it, and it matters. The villages do not burn because some calculation fails or some restraint is abandoned. They burn because Jaime has already made his accounting, has already decided what message requires what medium, and fire is the oldest language of power that anyone living in a thatched roof truly understands. 3 villages, each one loyal to House Tully by oath and by blood, and by the quiet, stubborn memory of men who have farmed the same soil their fathers farmed, each one reduced to ash and blackened timber, while Jaime's cavalry watches from horseback with the particular stillness of men who have been ordered to observe and not to feel. The smoke rises northeast, and it does not stop rising. It carries across the river country on a slow westward wind, over the low hills and the muddy tributary streams, over the autumn fields not yet fully harvested, and it reaches the nostrils of scouts riding under Stark banners before any formal report arrives. Robb Stark smells the Riverlands burning before he sees the maps that confirm it. He is 19 years old. He has his father's jaw and his mother's blue eyes, and a direwolf that moves beside him like a gray shadow made solid. And when the scouts bring their news, he does not react the way a boy would react. He goes quiet in the specific way that commanders go quiet. Not absence of thought, but the opposite of it, a concentration so complete it resembles stillness. Gray wind circles once and settles. The bannermen waiting in the command tent watch their young lord, and they see something in his face that none of them can precisely name, only recognize. They have seen it before. They saw it in Eddard Stark. The trap at the Tumblestone Crossing is not improvised. That is essential to understand. Robb has been studying the terrain since his forces crossed into the northern Riverlands, has been walking the ground in his mind the way his father taught him, not as landscape but as argument, each ford and ridge and tree line making a case for how bodies in motion can be controlled, slowed, turned. The Tumblestone is shallow at the crossing, but the banks are soft on the western approach, and the tree line on the eastern side is thick enough to swallow cavalry. When he places Great Jon Umber's infantry at the river's edge, it is not to stop Jaime's column, it is to slow it. The distinction is everything. Roose Bolton moves without sound. His riders come through the southern woodline in the gray half-light before dawn, and they do not shout or call or give any signal that would carry across the water. Bolton commands in whispers, and his men have learned to fight that way, quietly, efficiently, with the cold precision of men who serve a lord who rewards results and does not inquire too carefully about method. The hammer is Great Jon, enormous and bellowing and drawing every Lannister eye northward toward the crossing. The anvil is Bolton, arriving from the south like a thought someone else is already having. The Lannister column folds in on itself at the river's edge. Nearly 2,000 soldiers, good soldiers, trained men bearing the crimson and gold, find themselves caught in a space that was designed to hold them. The Tumblestone is behind them, and Umber is ahead of them, and when Bolton's cavalry emerges from the southern wood, the geometry of the trap becomes visible to every man present simultaneously. There is a moment, it lasts perhaps 4 breaths, when the outcome is still being processed, when the Lannister officers are still looking at one another with the particular expression of men calculating whether resistance is possibility or theater. Then the calculation completes, and the shields come down, and the surrender begins. Jaime is not among them. That fact settles into the Stark command like a stone into still water, sending ripples outward through every subsequent decision. He crosses the river with perhaps 40 riders, his household guard, men who have ridden with him long enough to read his intentions before he speaks them, and the far bank receives him and his horse and his golden hair and his reputation, and then the trees take him, and he is gone eastward into country that knows him better than it knows the boy general who has just won his first battle. Robb stands at the crossing and looks at the far bank for a long time. Greywind stands beside him and looks too, as though the wolf understands what the absence means. The rider who comes in from the northwest 3 hours later carries Tully colors and arrives at a pace that suggests urgency, contained by exhaustion, the horse blowing hard, and the rider's face carrying the particular expression of someone who has been holding news too large for the road. Behind him, at a slower pace, riding with the straight-backed composure of a woman who has passed through siege and fear and come out the other side into something harder and more purposeful, comes Catelyn Tully Stark. She finds her son standing at the edge of the Tumblestone, with his boots muddy to the ankle, and prisoners kneeling in long rows behind him, and the first thing she tells him is not a strategy, or a warning, or a political calculation. It is 4 words. Your father is alive. Robb Stark closes his eyes. When he opens them, the expression on his face has changed in a way that the watching bannermen will describe differently, depending on who asks them. Some will say relief, some will say focus, and Roose Bolton, standing 10 feet away with river mud drying on his riding leathers, will say simply that it looked like a man changing his mind about what war is for. Catelyn watches her son absorb the news, and she sees something reorganizing behind his eyes, some cold urgency softening into something still hard, but differently shaped, and she begins to understand that the campaign she has ridden to join is not the campaign she thought it was. Robb turns to her and he says, quietly, that they need to speak before the War Council convenes. And Catelyn looks at him, really looks, and nods. There is still the matter of Jaime. The Gold Road runs straight as a spear shaft through the western reaches of the Crownlands, cutting through rolling hills gone pale gold in the late summer heat, and it is on this road, wide enough for 4 horses abreast, flanked by old oak trees whose roots have cracked the paving stones over centuries, that Robert Baratheon does the thing his small council spent 3 consecutive evenings begging him not to do. He rides out. He rides out himself, in person, with Ned Stark at his right hand and 500 men at his back, and a parley banner snapping yellow-white above his head. Because Robert has always understood, at a level deeper than strategy, deeper than calculation, somewhere closer to bone, that some negotiations cannot be conducted through ravens or intermediaries or the careful choreography of courtly protocol. Some negotiations require the presence of bodies. His body, the king's body, broad and gray-bearded, and still capable of filling a saddle in a way that reminds men he was not always what he is now. He knows what they said in that council chamber. He sat and he listened, and then he stood, and the discussion was over. Tywin Lannister receives the royal request for parley the way he receives most things, without visible surprise, without visible anything. His maester reads the terms aloud in a field tent pitched on a low rise, and Tywin sits at a camp table with his hands folded and his face carrying the particular expression of a man who had already considered every probable move 3 days ago and is now simply watching the board arrange itself as anticipated. He agrees to the meeting. Of course he does. Refusing a parley banner is the kind of mistake that makes enemies of neutral lords, and Tywin Lannister has never been careless with the opinion of neutral lords. They meet at midday, when the sun is directly overhead and casts no shadow worth using for advantage. Both men mounted, both armies visible on distant ridges, banners just distinguishable at that range, gold on crimson, gold on black, the gold road between them empty and dusty, 2 sets of hooves leaving prints in the pale grit, and a silence that neither man rushes to fill, because both of them understand that the first word spoken here is itself a kind of concession. Robert speaks first. He has never pretended to be above impatience. He lays out his terms without decoration, the way he has always spoken when he means what he says. Cersei to be set aside by annulment, the children to stand before the faith for examination of legitimacy, and Tywin to keep his seat at Casterly Rock if his army is disbanded within a fortnight. He does not say what happens if the fortnight passes without disbanding. He does not need to. 500 men on the road behind him is not the whole of what waits, and Tywin knows the arithmetic of that silence as well as any man alive. Tywin listens. He sits his horse the way he sits everything, like the thing was built to hold him specifically, like the world arranges itself to provide him appropriate furniture. When Robert finishes, Tywin is quiet for a moment that is precisely long enough to communicate that he is choosing his response rather than reaching for it. He refuses nothing outright. He asks for 48 hours to consider. Robert, who has learned more about patience in the last 3 months than in the previous 35 years of his life, grants it. They ride back to their separate ridges, and the parley banner is folded, and the afternoon passes into a long, cooling evening, and the armies on their hills light their fires and wait. It is during that first night, the sky over the gold road thick with stars, the fires of 2 hosts burning their separate silences into the dark, that the letter arrives. It comes through Varys, as things tend to when Varys wishes them to arrive without being traced back to him, and it passes through 3 separate hands before it reaches Ned Stark, where he sits in the royal pavilion reviewing dispatch riders' reports by candlelight. The letter is sealed with a plain wax closure, no sigil, and inside is a document in a hand Ned recognizes after a moment's study as Pycelle's, the slightly cramped, heavily formal script of a man who has spent a lifetime making sure his words carry the weight of official sanction. Ned reads it once quickly and then sits very still. Then he reads it again, slowly, with the particular attention of a man who needs to be absolutely certain he has understood what he is holding. The document is a confession. It details, in the careful and self-exculpatory language of a frightened old man, writing under some pressure Ned can only begin to imagine, the circumstances surrounding the death of Jon Arryn, the substance, the method, the instruction given, and by whom. Tears of lice, administered in Jon's evening wine over the course of 2 weeks, long enough that the decline appeared natural to every eye in King's Landing, except the eyes that already knew what they were watching for. Cersei's instruction, Pycelle's hand, Jon Arryn's empty chair at a council table that had already swallowed his suspicions whole. Ned sets the letter down on the camp table. The candle beside him burns without wavering in the still air. He looks at it for a long moment, and then he stands and crosses to the entrance of the pavilion and tells the guard outside to wake the king. The hour before dawn carries its own quality of silence, different from the silence of midnight or the silence of early morning. It is the silence of the world holding its breath, of darkness that has committed to ending, but not yet begun, the work of ending. It is the hour men choose when they need to move without being seen, not because the darkness truly hides them, but because the men who might otherwise watch have surrendered to sleep, and sleeping men make poor witnesses. Ned rides alone. He has brought no guard, no escort, no banner. The confession is folded inside his riding coat, against his chest, and he can feel the shape of it against his ribs with every pace of the horse. The Lannister camp is perhaps half a mile from the Crown's position, and the ground between them is flat and gray in the pre-dawn, empty of everything except the frost that has settled overnight across the trampled grass. A peaceful distance. It will not stay peaceful long, one way or the other, and Ned understands this the same way he understands the weight of the document against his chest. Some things cannot be unknowed. Some doors, once opened, open only forward. The Lannister sentries stop him at the perimeter. He gives his name without ceremony, and the name alone is enough. Men are woken. Word is passed inward, toward the center of the camp, where the great pavilion stands, larger than the others, crimson and gold even in the gray half-light, as though the colors insist upon themselves regardless of the hour. He is made to wait. He does not mind. Waiting is something Ned Stark does with his whole body, without restlessness, without the small fidgets and sighs that betray impatience in lesser men. He waits the way stone waits, simply by remaining what it is. When the summons comes, he goes alone inside. Tywin Lannister sits at the camp table as though he has been sitting there for hours, which he may well have been. He is a man who gives the impression of never having been caught in the act of becoming, of simply existing, fully formed, in whatever posture the moment requires. He does not rise when Ned enters. He does not speak. He watches with pale eyes that have spent a lifetime reducing everything they observe to its component use and uselessness. Ned crosses to the table. He removes the folded parchment from inside his coat and sets it down without explanation, without flourish. He steps back one pace and waits. Tywin picks it up. He reads it the way powerful men read things they suspect will cost them, without visible reaction, the face entirely still, only the eyes moving. He reads it once through to the end. Then he reads it again, just as Ned had done, with that second careful attention that means the first reading was not disbelief, but rather the gathering of comprehension before comprehension can fully land. The candle on the table burns between them. Neither man moves. Outside, the camp shifts and murmurs in the early dark, men rolling toward waking without yet knowing they have been woken. Tywin sets the parchment down. The silence that follows is not the silence of a man without words. It is the silence of a man in the act of recalculating, of taking the sum he has spent his life building and finding it altered by a number he did not introduce. It is the silence of Tywin Lannister understanding, fully and without the comfort of ambiguity, that Cersei has done this. Not only that she has done it, but the shape of what she has done, the reach of it, the recklessness of it, the way it extends in every direction like a crack through stone, splitting apart things that had seemed solid. He calls for his maester. Ned does not move while the old man is brought forward, blinking and hurrying, clutching his chain. Tywin hands him the document without a word. The maester reads it. He examines the seal. He holds it toward the light. He murmurs something low and confirmatory, the sounds a man makes when he is hoping he has misread and discovering that he has not. Tywin dismisses him with a gesture so small it barely qualifies as movement. Then there is silence again, a longer silence this time, the kind that arrives when a decision has already been made and is simply waiting for the voice that will speak it into existence. Ned accepts the terms. Tywin accepts them. The precision of the exchange has nothing to do with warmth, and everything to do with the recognition of two men who understand, without needing to say it, that they are past the point where posturing serves either of them. Tywin's army will disband. Cersei will be surrendered to crown justice. The words are plain, and the agreement is real, ratified in the gray pre-dawn by two men standing across a camp table while a candle burns between them. There is one condition Robert has offered, one concession Ned carries south like a stone placed carefully in still water. Tommen and Myrcella, the children, innocent of everything their mother chose, royal wards, not prisoners, their futures to be arranged without cruelty, without punishment for blood they did not choose. Tywin looks at the candle when he hears this, not at Ned, at the flame. Then he nods. Once, slowly, the way a man nods when he has already accepted the worst and found, in the wreckage, one thing worth preserving. The war that almost was ends in that nod. No trumpet sounds it. No herald rides to announce it. Outside, the camp is beginning to stir toward morning. Men who do not yet know that the reason they sharpened their swords last night has already dissolved in the pre-dawn quiet of a crimson pavilion. Ned folds the parchment and returns it to his coat. He turns to leave. He is almost to the entrance when Tywin speaks for the first time since the maester was dismissed. The voice is not loud. It does not need to be.
Lord Stark.
Ned stops. He does not turn immediately. When he does, Tywin is still looking at him with those pale, measuring eyes, and the expression on his face is not grief exactly, and not anger exactly, but something older than either, the specific exhaustion of a man who has spent his whole life building something and now must reckon with who else had access to it. "Tell the king," Tywin says, "that I expect the terms honored in full." The city knows before the bells ring. That is how it always is in King's Landing. The knowledge moves through its warrens and alleys and fishmonger stalls faster than any official proclamation, carried in the tightened jaw of a gold cloak, in the way the servants at the Red Keep walk a little more carefully, in the hush that falls over the harbor taverns, like weather moving in off the bay. By the time the High Septon takes his seat before the panel of 7 lords assembled in the throne room's eastern hall, there is not a soul in the capital who does not already know, in broad strokes, what is about to happen. Cersei Lannister is brought in without ceremony. She had asked for ceremony, had demanded it, in fact, in the precise language of a woman who still believes that the forms of power are power itself. The request is denied. She walks between 2 members of the Kingsguard, her hair unbound, her gown the plain gray they have required, and she holds her chin at the angle that has always served her so well, the angle that says she is above this room, above these men, above whatever judgment they believe themselves capable of. It is a remarkable performance. It changes nothing. Pycelle's confession is read aloud by a court scribe, every damning syllable of it, the old maester's handwriting described as trembling but legible, the words themselves surgical in their precision. He had not confessed out of conscience. Grand maesters rarely do anything out of conscience. He had confessed because Varys had shown him, with quiet and unhurried clarity, precisely what the alternative looked like. And so his voice, in absentia, fills the hall. The slow poisoning of Jon Arryn, the careful cultivation of Cersei's secrets, the decades of small treasons nested inside the larger architecture of his service. Cersei does not look at the scribe. She looks at a fixed point above the panel's heads, somewhere near the high windows, as if she has already removed herself to some other place where none of this can reach her. Varys speaks next. He speaks the way he always does, softly, pleasantly, with the particular gentle regret of a man who finds the truth unfortunate but necessary. He does not embellish. He does not need to. The facts are embellishment enough, each one placed with the care of a stone mason who understands that the wall will stand or fall on the exactness of the fit. When Ned Stark rises to give his own account, the hall is already very still. He speaks without flourish, without theater, recounting what he found and what it cost him to find it. And there is something in his plainness that lands harder than any rhetoric could. Cersei closes her eyes, briefly, only briefly. Then they are open again, fixed once more on that point above the panel's heads, unreadable and very far away. The verdict is not a surprise to anyone in the room, and yet the moment it is pronounced, it settles over the assembled lords with a weight that surprises even those who had argued for it. Guilty of treason, guilty of conspiracy, guilty of the murder of Jon Arryn, the king's hand, and by extension of the war that was very nearly paid for in rivers of blood. The sentence is delivered by the High Septon in a voice that carries the careful gravity of a man who understands he is participating in something history will not forget. Confinement for the remainder of her natural life within the Silent Sisters. No title, no correspondence, no visitors who carry power or news. The world will continue its turning, and Cersei Lannister will know nothing of it. She does not weep. That would have surprised no one who knows her. She does not rage or plead or collapse. She stands perfectly still as the sentence is delivered, and in the absolute control of that stillness, there is something almost magnificent, the last expression of a will that could not be broken, even when everything else was taken. The gold cloaks come forward. She turns with them. She does not look back. What happens to Joffrey is a crueler thing in its way, and everyone in the hall knows it. Cruelty directed at an adult can at least be met with the full weight of an adult's understanding. The boy standing before the panel is 12 years old and utterly convinced of his own destiny. And when the faith's formal declaration is read, illegitimate, true-born son of Jaime Lannister, no claim to any throne or title of the crown, the fury that crosses his face is the fury of a child who has been told that the world he was promised does not exist. His hands are shaking. He looks, in this moment, nothing at all like Jaime, and nothing at all like Cersei, only like a boy who has never once been denied anything and has now been denied everything at once. He is given to Tywin's custody to be taken to Casterly Rock as a ward of his grandfather's house. He will not be a king. He will likely never hold meaningful power. His grandfather's riders are already outside the hall. Tywin receives the boy in the courtyard without visible emotion, the way Tywin receives most things. What passes between them is not witnessed by anyone who will later speak of it. The riders form up. The boy does not cry until they are well clear of the gate, and even then he is careful to turn his face from the men who flank him. Whatever he becomes at Casterly Rock, and there are those who will spend years wondering about that, he becomes it without a throne waiting for him at the end. Jaime's surrender arrives at the Red Keep 3 days later, carried in his own handwriting on a single page, the terms of amnesty for his soldiers outlined with soldier's precision, his own fate offered up with the kind of unceremonious clarity that is either courage or exhaustion, and perhaps is both. Robert reads it alone in his solar. Ned is present, standing near the window, watching the king's face for the thing that will tell him which way this lands. Robert reads it twice. He sets it on the table. He is quiet for a long moment, and in that quiet, Ned can see the calculation moving behind his eyes, the old hatred for the Kingslayer, the memory of a sword going through the back of the man who sat a throne Robert bled to claim, the image of Jaime Lannister on those steps, the blade still wet, the expression carefully composed. He wants his men safe, Robert says. He does, Ned says. He'll get it. Robert's voice is flat, and then something else moves through it. Not quite humor, not quite contempt, but some alloy of the two that only Robert can produce. As for him, he taps the page once. The wall. There's always room at the wall for a man of his particular qualifications. Ned considers this. A Kingslayer guarding the kingdoms he once betrayed. There is a symmetry to it that is either justice or irony, and Ned is not certain there is a meaningful difference between the two. He nods, slowly. Robert reaches for the page again, and then stops. Something crosses his face that is harder to read. Not the calculation of a king, but the older emotion underneath it. The grief that has been there since long before any of this began, wearing different faces over the years but always present, always costing him something. "Ned," he says, and does not continue immediately. Outside the window, the city is going about its afternoon, the ordinary commerce of a capital that has just watched its entire ruling order remade, the bells of the sept striking the hour the way they always do, indifferent as stone. "Ned," he says, and does not continue immediately. Outside the window, the city is going about its afternoon, the ordinary commerce of a capital that has just watched its entire ruling order remade, the bells of the sept striking the hour the way they always do, indifferent as stone. Then the doors open. Stannis Baratheon does not wait to be announced. He never has. He enters a room the way he enters every calculation, without ceremony, without warmth, with the absolute conviction of a man who has already worked out exactly where he stands before his boot clears the threshold. He is leaner than Robert, harder in the jaw, and where his brother wears authority like an old cloak, something inherited and broken in, Stannis wears it like armor, polished, deliberate, and unyielding at every joint. He sees Ned first, then Robert, then the papers on the table. His eyes move across all three with the same flat, measuring patience, and the room shifts the way rooms do when Stannis enters them. Not in temperature exactly, but in something adjacent to it. "Brother," Robert says. "Your Grace?" Stannis does not sit. He crosses to the table, looks down at what lies there, and says, without any particular anger, but with tremendous precision, "The Lannisters are still in their tower." Robert's jaw tightens. They are. Tywin Lannister commanded an army that marched on this city. His children conspired against the crown. His son— I know what his son did, Stannis. Then I am at a loss to explain the tower. The silence between them has texture. It is not the silence of men who have run out of things to say, but the silence of men who have been saying the same things to each other for 20 years and have learned, through repeated failure, that volume accomplishes nothing. Ned sets down his cup. He does not raise his voice. He does not move to stand between them. He simply speaks, quietly, in the way that a river speaks, not urgently, but with the steady authority of something that will still be flowing long after the argument is finished. He lays it out without theater, the Lannister gold, the stability of the debt markets, the precedent of wholesale destruction against a house that has, since the trial, made no hostile move, the practical mathematics of ruling a kingdom that still runs on Lannister grain in 3 of its southern regions. Stannis listens to every word of this without interruption, which is itself a form of respect that he extends to very few people. When Ned finishes, the silence returns, but it is a different silence, not the old friction of brothers who have never understood each other, but something more considered. Stannis does not concede. He never concedes. But he pivots, and with Stannis, a pivot is as close to concession as the world will ever get. He pulls out a chair, finally, and sits. He places a sheaf of his own documents on the table, figures, columns, projections, and he says, with the flat focus of a man who has already moved on to the more interesting problem, "Then we have a great deal of work to do. The crown's finances are a ruin." He is not wrong. The ledgers that emerge over the following days are a kind of horror in numerical form. Years of Littlefinger's careful erosion, debts moved here, revenues redirected there, interest accumulated at rates that would make a Braavosi banker wince, have left the crown owing more than it can service without extraordinary measures. Stannis goes through the books the way he goes through everything, without sentiment, without pausing to be outraged when outrage would cost him time, and what he finds confirms what he already suspected. The rot is deep. It is systematic. It has the elegant, deliberate quality of architecture rather than accident. And at the center of it, always, is the same name. Petyr Baelish does not wait for the crown to come to him. He is already gone before the first rider leaves the Red Keep, or he believes he is. The road to the Eyrie is long, and the mountain passes narrow, and he has traveled them before. He has a talent for disappearing into the geography of a situation, for making himself small and swift and difficult to find until he is exactly where he wants to be. What he does not account for, riding northeast through a gray morning with 2 servants and a chest of documents he has not yet burned, is that Ned Stark has been a northern lord his entire adult life, and northern lords understand something about distance and terrain and the mathematics of interception that a man raised in the castles of the Fingers does not. The riders are already on the high road when Baelish reaches the fork. 4 of them, gray cloaks. They are not moving fast because they do not need to move fast. They have simply placed themselves at the point on the map where the road narrows and the alternatives close off, which is a thing you learn to do when you grow up hunting in country where patience matters more than speed. Baelish looks at the riders. The riders look at Baelish. He does not run. There would be no point. Instead, he straightens in his saddle, rearranges his expression into something that resembles calm confidence, and says, in the tone of a man who is choosing to misread the situation entirely, "Good morning. I wonder if you might direct me to Lord Baelish." The lead rider's voice is not unkind, but it is entirely without ambiguity. The hand requests your return to the capital. The chest behind him in the cart, the one with the documents he has not yet burned, sits very still in the morning light. Baelish smiles. It is the smile of a man running very fast calculations behind a very still face. "Of course," he says, "I would be glad to." He is brought back to King's Landing 3 days later, and the chest comes with him, its latches intact, its contents undisturbed. Stannis is the one who opens it. He does so without ceremony, in the small council chamber, with Ned present, and Robert standing by the window with his arms crossed, and what comes out of that chest, page by page, column by column, transaction by transaction, is the full record of what Petyr Baelish has spent 15 years carefully never writing down in any official ledger. It is meticulous. It is thorough. It is, in its own way, a masterwork, not of governance, but of its opposite. Every page is a kind of answer to a question no one thought to ask at the time. Where did the gold go? Where did the shortfall come from? Whose pocket absorbed what, and when, and under which name, and by which mechanism, and what favor was owed or collected in exchange? Stannis does not speak for a long time after the last page is read. Then he says, very quietly, he should hang. Robert looks at Ned. Ned looks at the pages. The sentence, when it is handed down, is not death. It is something that Baelish, who has always understood power as the ability to move freely through a room full of people who underestimate him, will find in some ways considerably worse. A counting house in Braavos, crown supervision, his skills employed in the service of the debts he helped create, and not one silver stag of profit for himself, and not 1 inch of latitude in which to maneuver, and not one man in the building who answers to him. He is escorted to a ship at dawn. He does not look back at the city as it recedes, or if he does, no one records it. The small council begins meeting again, properly, this time, not the performative gatherings that Robert has long preferred, which began late and ended early, and accomplished nothing except to give the appearance of governance while the actual work was done by others in other rooms. These meetings are different. They are shorter than they used to be, and drier, and significantly less comfortable, because Stannis runs them with a thoroughness that does not permit distraction. Robert attends. He does not enjoy attending, but he attends. There is a morning, perhaps a fortnight into this new rhythm, when Robert arrives early, not on time, early. Ned is already there, reviewing a report on grain stores in the Reach. Robert sits down across from him, pours his own wine, does not call for a servant to do it, and picks up one of the secondary documents on the table with the expression of a man who is deciding, for the first time in a long time, to actually read what is in front of him. He reads it. He does not finish it before the others arrive, but he does not put it down. It is not transformation. It is not the arrival of some better, wiser king from the ashes of the old one. It is something smaller and more real than that. A man of 50, with bad knees, and a lifetime of choices that cannot be undone, picking up a document about grain stores and deciding, on a quiet morning, to understand it. Ned watches this from across the table and says nothing. There are things that words would only diminish. Outside, the city moves through its morning. The markets open. The bells of the sept mark the hour. In a small office near the harbor, a steward is beginning the long, painstaking work of calculating exactly how many years it will take the crown to clear its debts. Assuming no new wars, no new disasters, no new catastrophic failures of judgment. The number is large. It is not impossible. It is, for the first time in longer than anyone cares to remember, a number that someone is actually trying to calculate. And then, a raven arrives from the wall. Ned sees the seal first, black wax, a small, stylized crown above the letters of Castle Black. He has not received a raven from the wall in months, not since Jon's last letter, which arrived in the early days of the trial, and which he has read 3 times in private moments he has not shared with anyone. He breaks the seal. He reads. The hand that holds the letter does not tremble, but it goes very still. The raven from the wall carries Jon's handwriting, careful, deliberate strokes that Ned has always recognized as the product of discipline rather than natural ease. Jon was not a boy who wrote easily. He was a boy who did everything with effort, as if the world required more of him than it did of others, as if he understood from some early and unspoken place that he had something to prove. The letter is not long. It does not need to be. Jon writes that he has heard what happened in the Great Sept from 3 different sources before allowing himself to believe any of them, which is such a precise and characteristic thing for Jon Snow to do that Ned almost smiles at the page. He writes that he understands now why Ned kept certain truths close during those terrible weeks in King's Landing. He writes that he is not leaving the Night's Watch. This last line sits alone, slightly separated from what comes before it, as if Jon himself paused before committing it to the page. He is not leaving. He has made his choice with open eyes, which is the only way a choice means anything at all. Ned folds the letter. He does not read it a fourth time. He holds it for a moment in both hands and then sets it down on the table with the particular, careful stillness of a man placing something fragile in a location where it will not be forgotten. What Jon understands, what the letter communicates without ever stating directly, is that the realm's chance at survival depends on unity that did not exist before Robert swung that sword in the sept. A Stark executed in chains, a Lannister ascendant, a North in open rebellion, a realm fractured into its competing grievances. This was the world as it nearly became. Jon can see the wall more clearly than most. He knows what waits beyond it with a soldier's knowledge rather than a lord's abstraction. The cold does not negotiate. The dead do not pause to consider the political situation in the south. And so Jon Snow chooses to remain, not because he has no other life available to him, but because he understands that his life in this place is the thing that matters most right now. The letter does not say this in those words. It does not need to. Winterfell in late autumn is a different creature than Winterfell in summer. The stones hold a particular gray that deepens as the light shortens, and the smoke from the great hearths moves differently against a low sky, rolling outward and flattening as if the air above the castle is pressing gently down. Ned rides through the gates on a morning when the first real frost has traced every surface with pale precision. The battlements, the windowsills, the old wood of the stables, every edge of everything rendered in white. He does not announce himself ahead of time. The ravens he sent went to Robb, and Robb alone, because some arrivals should not be managed into ceremony. Catelyn is the first person he sees who is not a guardsman. She is crossing the yard from the direction of the Godswood, moving with that particular combination of purpose and preoccupation that has always meant she is carrying more thoughts than she is showing. And she stops when she sees him dismount. She does not run, she does not speak. She crosses the remaining distance between them at the same measured pace, and then she is simply there, both arms around him, her face against his shoulder, and Ned holds her with the full weight of everything the past months have cost them. Neither of them speaks for a long time. There are things that words would only diminish here too. The steward with his debt calculations was the last thing that required language. This requires nothing but presence. Bran finds him in the great hall before the afternoon has passed its midpoint, moving through the space with the careful, determined momentum of a boy relearning the geometry of the world from a different vantage. He does not ask his father about what happened in King's Landing. He asks about Jon. He asks if Jon is well. Ned tells him yes, and that Jon sends his love, which is not precisely what the letter said, but is what the letter meant. Bran accepts this with the grave, thoughtful nod of someone who has had months to practice receiving difficult truths and emerging intact on the other side. Sansa is more formal with him at first, which is not coldness but armor, and Ned does not try to remove it quickly. He sits with her at dinner and listens to her talk about the things she observed in King's Landing with a precision and a composure that tells him more about what she lived through than any direct account would. She watched everything. She filed it all away. There is a version of Sansa Stark emerging from this experience that Ned did not fully anticipate, and he finds that he is paying close attention. Arya corners him after the hall has emptied. She does not approach the subject indirectly. She never has. She stood in the Great Sept and she watched Robert Baratheon fight for her father's life with a blunted sword, and she watched it with the focused attention of someone learning something specific. She wants to be taught properly, she says. She wants to learn to fight, not dancing lessons, not Sirio's water dancing, though she does not dismiss it. She means the full thing. She means all of it. Ned looks at his youngest daughter across the dying firelight, and he is quiet for a long moment. He does not say no. He does not say yes. He says, "Tell me what you already know." And Arya sits forward and begins. 3 years pass the way years do in the north, slowly at first, and then all at once, measured not in moments but in seasons, in the turning of light and the gathering of cold, in the way snow settles across stone battlements and does not melt for months. Robert Baratheon dies in the 14th year of his reign, not by a boar, not by a blade in the dark or a cup measured carefully by someone who understood that poison leaves fewer questions than a sword. He dies of a fever, the ordinary kind, the kind that takes old men who have carried too much weight for too many years, and one day simply decides it has waited long enough. He is 51 years old. He is in his own bed in the Red Keep, and Stannis is there when it happens, and Ned Stark is there, having ridden south for the Winter Council, and Robert spends the last coherent hours of his life telling a story about a boar hunt that no one in the room believes happened the way he tells it, but no one interrupts him because it is a good story and because they understand that a man is entitled to his own version of his own life at the end of it. He dies laughing at the ending of the story. Ned thinks later that this is exactly how Robert Baratheon would have chosen to go, if Robert Baratheon had ever allowed himself to choose anything quietly. The succession is clean. This is the thing that matters most to the realm, though the realm will not fully understand its own luck for another generation. Stannis ascends to the Iron Throne with the full and uncontested support of the great lords, with no whispered questions about blood or lineage, with no golden-haired children suddenly finding their claims inconvenient, with no Lannister gold flooding the small council or shaping the terms of mourning. The great houses bend the knee in the order protocol demands. The ceremony is precise and cold, exactly the way Stannis prefers things, and Ned stands at his right hand as Hand of the King, and there is no drama in this, and no blood, and the small folk in the streets of King's Landing light fires that night, not because they are celebrating conquest, but because they are celebrating the quiet, ordinary miracle of a throne passing without war. The realm is not perfect. The realm has never been perfect, and was not designed to be. The Greyjoys brood on the Iron Islands, as they have always brooded, nursing old grievances against a history that did not go the way they wanted. Daenerys Targaryen is across the narrow sea, and she is not forgotten, and the dragon eggs that some say she carried into exile are a subject that the small council discusses more often than Stannis finds comfortable. Winter is coming, and winter means what it has always meant in the deeper logic of the world, something larger than politics, something older than any throne, pressing down from the north with a patience that human ambition cannot match. But the war that would have consumed Westeros has not happened. This is the weight of the difference, and it is a weight that can only be measured in absences, in the villages that were not burned, in the harvests that were not destroyed to deny them to an enemy, in the hundreds of thousands of men and women and children who lived their ordinary lives in the space where a generation of catastrophic war would have been. The Lannister stranglehold on the crown is broken. The institutions of Westeros function as they were meant to function. Lords bend the knee to a king whose claim they do not dispute. The Night's Watch receives its funding. The maesters file their reports. Justice moves, slowly, imperfectly, but in the direction justice is supposed to move. Ned Stark stands on the battlements of Winterfell on the third day of a royal visit and watches Robert's children in the yard below. They are loud and undisciplined in the particular way of children who know they are loved, and they are chasing each other through the light snowfall with a complete indifference to the cold that marks them as Southerners pretending at Northern toughness. He watches them and he thinks of Robert, and he does not try to stop himself from missing him, because grief is not a problem to be solved, and Robert Baratheon was not a small loss. He thinks about the Great Sept. He thinks about Robert rising from his seat. He thinks about the sound the crowd made, that exhaled, collective disbelief, when the king stepped down onto the floor and picked up a blunted sword for the oldest reason in the world, which is that a friend was in danger and there was something to be done about it. He has turned this moment over in his mind many times across 3 years. He has tried to understand it from every angle that a man trained to reason carefully about the world can understand it from. He keeps arriving at the same place. One decision, one man stepping forward when it would have been easier and safer and more politically expedient to sit still and let the machinery of power do what machinery of power is designed to do. Snow falls across Winterfell in long, slow curtains, the way it falls when it intends to stay. The children below are laughing at something one of them said, and the sound rises up through the cold air, and Ned breathes it in and holds it. He does not thank the gods out loud. He is not a man who speaks his gratitude into the open air, but he finds it there, present and full, the way the deepest things are always present, quietly, without requiring acknowledgement, patient as the snow itself, settling over the world it has always known, soft and permanent and still. And this brings us to the end of this alternate history. If you enjoyed exploring how events might have unfolded differently, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel. We dive into new stories from the world of Westeros every single day, imagining the choices, battles, alliances, and destinies that could have completely changed the fate of the Seven Kingdoms. I'd also love to hear your thoughts. What do you think would have happened next? Did this version of history end better than the original? Or would you have taken the story in a completely different direction? Leave your ideas in the comments, because many of the best future stories come directly from your suggestions. Thank you so much for watching and for spending your time with me. I'll see you tomorrow with another alternate history from Westeros. Until then, peace out.